Hello and welcome to a Therapeutic Hour. I'm your host, Michelle Overton. Whether you're here because it feels dark, you feel stuck, or you simply want to understand yourself better, you're in the right place. With over 400 types of therapy out there, it's no wonder it's hard to know where to begin. Join me and my guests as we demystify therapy and support you to self-heal. So settle in, relax, and let's begin your journey inwards together. This is a Therapeutic Hour. Welcome to our second episode of a Therapeutic Hour. We're joined by Professor Ahmed Hankir. Dr. Hankir is a multi-award-winning psychiatrist who is not only an expert mental health professional, but also brings a unique and powerful perspective through his own lived experience of having a mental ill health condition. His book, Breakthrough, is a story of hope, resilience, and mental health recovery. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be inspired by Dr. Hankir's journey. Oh, hello, Ahmed.
Hi, Michelle.
Yeah, so I've been so excited to have this conversation and have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. I share your excitement, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I came across your work on Twitter, possibly about a couple of years ago, and I was really blown away with the work that you were doing as, you know, an award-winning psychiatrist and also a person who has a lived experience of having a mental ill health condition as well. So just wow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I know that you are a game changer in this world. So I'm really looking forward to our listeners hearing about your experiences and the wisdom that you are generously sharing to help others.
Well, we have to share, right? And I'm grateful to you for providing me with this platform so that we can disseminate this message of hope and recovery to as many people as possible.
Yeah, definitely. That hope is central to recovery. Yes.
Yes.
So I thought if we started with the basics.
Sure.
And I wanted to ask you, so what is the journey and the training on becoming a psychiatrist, please, and also the general role of a psychiatrist?
Sure. So I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I went to medical school in Manchester, in England, hence why I'm a, a Red Devil supporter, but it hasn't been easy since Ferguson retired. But as I was saying, I went to medical school in Manchester. Before I matriculated into medical school, I did my A-levels in Leeds. So usually especially if you are from the UK, then you would need the A-levels. It's an essential requirement. Usually need to get straight A grades.
Mm.
And you can join medical school as a graduate. So, for example, you can do a bachelor's in neuroscience, for example, and that will usually take 3 years. And then you can do the graduate course in medicine, which would take 4 years. But I joined medical school as an undergraduate, so it should take 5 years. But
Yeah.
I had a mental health crisis during medical school, so it took me longer.
Yeah.
And then you qualify, and then you enter something called the foundation program.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes at least 2 years if you're working full time, and you rotate from one. So each year, back when I was a foundation doctor, rather, each year was comprised of 3 4-month placements.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when I was a foundation year one doctor, my first 4-month placement was in obstetrics and gynecology. Then I did gastroenterology. Then I did vascular surgery, and then the F2 year is also 3 4-month placements.
Yes.
And then you finish that, and you start your specialist training. And you enter something called core psychiatric training, which is usually 3 years in duration. And during that period, you need to pass the exams. You need to become a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and then you can transition into something called higher training, and
Okay.
that also takes 3 years. So, but it
Wow.
depends. Yeah. So in total, it's 6 plus 2 is 8 plus 5 is what, 13, at least 13 years. It took me longer for multiple reasons. But yes, that's the journey to becoming a consultant psychiatrist in the UK.
Yes. Hey, thank you very much. 13 years. My goodness
13 years.
me.
Lots
Yeah.
happens throughout. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a process.
Well, I'm thinking about all of the sweat and the tears and everything on that journey to actually really, make a difference to another human being's journey in this world as well. So much training that goes into it.
A lot of training, absolutely. I mean, for me to be trusted with your mental health and with your brain health, I
Yeah.
have to, as you said, I have to go through so much training. But I mean, it's precious, right? I mean, you can argue there's nothing more precious than your brain health and your mental health.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense, I guess, and if you look at it from that perspective.
It does, yes. You also mention in your book, which we will talk about, but you mention about psychiatry not being viewed as a high status clinical
Ah,
area to go
yeah,
into. I
yeah, yeah.
think I think you said in your book that perhaps at the beginning of your journey or before you went on the journey to becoming a doctor, you were thinking of going into cardiology or was it plastic surgery?
Plastic surgery, more cardiothoracic surgery.
Ah,
Yeah, that was before I became a medical student. But I
yes,
think my perception was influenced by my cultural background. And we know there's a
yes,
huge amount of stigma attached to not only mental health conditions, but also the psychiatric profession, psychiatric medications.
yeah,
And yes, so initially I didn't want to specialize in psychiatry. But
yeah.
I went through some life experiences, and yeah, my approach to mental health and psychiatry changed as a result.
And that's actually what I was just about to ask you to say,
Yeah,
yeah, what brought you to making that decision? But it sounds as though it was your own life experiences.
yeah. I mean, more specifically, when I was a medical student in Manchester in 2006, there was a devastating conflict in Lebanon,
Yeah,
and my parents were living in Lebanon at the time. And I woke up one morning to discover that my hometown was bombed and that hundreds of people were killed overnight. And my nightmare turned into reality and my world turned
horrendous.
upside down. And I didn't know if my parents were among the dead. And so I felt overwhelmed. I felt powerless. And I discovered how utterly beholden we are to the power and mercy of our minds.
Yeah,
And I think that is when I first considered specializing in psychiatry.
yes, yes. Hey, thank you for sharing that experience.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Actually, it reminds me as well of I'm thinking about when I worked at the University of Leicester. So
Mm,
I worked as a senior counsellor there.
mm,
So I had the privilege of working with many students, including medical students. And I really remember a very young man. He seemed young. I'm not too sure whether he was 19, 20, or how old he was now, but I can remember him coming with real anxiety around the first time that he would be working with a dead body.
mm,
And I saw for him that there could, he felt this stigma of him having any poor mental health or
mm.
mental ill health, of how that might be viewed by his tutors.
Yeah,
So I really felt that there was a lack of compassion. And this is going back about 6 years ago now
yeah,
when I
yeah.
worked there. And I know you talk about this in your book as well.
I talk about how I think services can improve,
Yes.
and that we certainly need more compassion and humility
Yeah.
in undergraduate and postgraduate medical education, teaching, training. And we know how competitive medical school is. And it
Yeah.
feel like if you show any vulnerability, then it can compromise your chances of actually qualifying.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a perception out there that we should be stoic, that we should be invincible, that nothing should affect us, even cadavers or dead bodies, and so
Yeah.
that really needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Another thing that I can remember is that I'm sure back then, I don't know if it's changed, but everybody could see where their scores were on the table. So
Yeah,
people felt that they could work out. I thought, oh my goodness me, that level of anxiety for people. So it's really pressurized training, isn't it?
it really is. It really is, and I don't think I've ever felt such tremendous stress and strain on my mental health than when I was a medical student. I mean, I have been challenged without a
Yeah.
doubt since becoming a doctor, but the medical student experience, I
Mm.
mean, that was when I reached my breaking point. And
Yeah.
we've mentioned some of the factors. So I think, I mean, it's even been described as a breeding ground. Medical school has been described as a breeding ground for mental
Right.
health stigma. There's something called the hidden curriculum as well. And, what's happening in the
Goodness.
hidden curriculum? It's not like the hidden curriculum is in our, for example, medical school manual or whatever.
Mm.
And that's, I think, where things like stigma flourish
Yeah.
and this kind of expectation that you should just get on with it.
Yes. Yes. I'm taking all that in. I think it's really helpful for people to hear this as
I hope so.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll talk about your book here. So
There
it's been amazing to see your journey with your book as well. Honestly, so I've read it and I really recommend for people to read it. So what stood out for me from the book was you as a Muslim man
Yes.
who has been a service provider
Yeah.
and also a service user.
Mm.
And I wondered around the triumphs and the challenges that you've had with that. So I didn't know if you wanted to share a little bit more about that, please.
Absolutely. No, no, thank you so much for asking. Thank you for reading my book. And I did read your feedback as well. So I'm immensely grateful for that. Thank you. Very kind of you. I think you've raised a few points. I do identify, so identity is really important.
Yeah.
And because I remember having an identity crisis, and this was during medical school. And it's not the best time to have an identity crisis during
No.
medical school. And no, absolutely, identify as a Muslim man, as a man of color, as a survivor, as a person living with a mental health condition, as both a mental health care professional, so a consultant psychiatrist, and a mental health care receiver. I think the term receiver, words are important. And I think the connotation of receiver is not the same as user.
Ah,
They're like, I mean, maybe this, the nuances, for example. So I
yes.
would say I'm a mental health care receiver as opposed to a mental health care user.
Interesting.
Some people may argue they are synonymous, but it sounds different.
It does.
Yeah, I
Sounds
mean,
empowering.
yeah, oh, very much so. I mean, very much so. And I mean, I was a psychiatric patient, and so in my book, I discussed approaching mental health from the dual perspectives of mental health care provider and mental health care receiver, or in my capacity as a wounded healer.
Yeah.
And it was a journey without a doubt, but I draw, and we coined this mnemonic. I coined this mnemonic with a dear friend of mine at Yale School of Medicine, Professor Andreas Martin, who is the director, if I'm not mistaken, of child and adolescent mental health care services in New Haven, in
Right.
Connecticut, in the USA. It's an Ivy League university. And he's open, honest, and transparent about his mental health experiences. And he is a psychiatrist living with bipolar affective disorder.
Okay.
And we connected and we coined this mnemonic EPPE, which is expert by personal and professional experience. So let me unpack that. So a person living with a mental health condition can identify as an expert by experience. Not all of us, but some persons living with a mental health condition, many persons arguably identify as an expert by personal experience. And if you're a consultant psychiatrist, then you can identify as an expert by professional experience. And if you're a mental health care professional living with a mental health condition or a wounded healer, you identify as an expert by personal and professional experience. And
Yeah.
I feel like I draw more on my personal expertise. I draw on both, but to have these kind of authentic connections with persons receiving care from me, I feel like I draw more on my personal expertise than I do on my professional expertise. And
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought I would mention that.
Yeah. No, definitely. And yeah, and if I bring it back to myself, and I think, at times in my life I've lived with severe anxiety. And so I can remember for myself of perhaps when I've been sitting on the other side of the chair with a counsellor, as I'm a person-centred counsellor myself.
Yes.
And I can remember feeling a little bit fearful of
Mm.
perhaps feeling able to totally come forward and be seen,
Mm.
as I was feeling really vulnerable. So I know that can add other complexities, but the way that you've just described that, of how it's really supported your work and of how you're working with people, it really can't it?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I mean, thank you for sharing. And this might resonate with you because I feel my experiences living with a mental health condition have made me more insightful,
Yeah.
have made me more empathetic, and have made me more driven. There's like a fire burning in my belly and thunder in my heart to contribute to a cultural revolution, that humanizes and empowers and dignifies persons living with a mental health condition. And it's not only that, when I was working in central London in England, because I'm in London, Ontario at the moment in Canada, but I
Yes.
live between Canada and the UK. So when I was in London, England, and you get the phone call from the psychiatric liaison nurse working in the emergency department at St. Thomas Hospital, and they'll say, well, there's a person in a mental health crisis. We think they need to be admitted into hospital involuntarily. Can you come and see them? And it's like I said, I draw more on my personal expertise than I do on my professional expertise. And I mean, I'll share an anecdote. I'll share an anecdote with you. Um, I'll ask them, does it feel like you're existing? It doesn't feel like you were living. Is that is that
Yeah.
how you feel? And every single patient, without exception, in a mental health crisis will respond, yes, that's exactly how I feel. And I didn't get that question from my psychiatric textbooks. You
No.
know, I got that question from my experiences living with a mental health condition. So that's, I know, an anecdote, but I
Yeah.
think it does illustrate the point.
It really does. It really does. And it reminds me of a story that you shared in your book
Mm.
when you were working in the psychiatric intensive care unit.
Yeah. Mm.
And there was a gentleman who was really afraid.
I was
So I don't know, did
terrified.
you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because I honestly felt so moved at how you had dealt with, helped him.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Often behavioral disturbances, aggression, even anger, rage, often that's a manifestation of pain and
Yeah,
fear. It's often a manifestation of pain and fear. So
definitely.
I received a phone call that there's a patient in the psychiatric intensive care unit, and he is being aggressive, and they want to physically and chemically restrain him,
Yeah.
administer rapid tranquilization.
Mm.
And so I arrived, and I heard a member of staff whisper, "He's a terrorist."
Yeah.
It was very upsetting for me to hear, because the patient is a Muslim patient, and he was carrying a copy of the Holy Quran,
Yeah.
and they were about to chemically restrain him. And I said, "Please," I intervened. I said, "Please stop.
Mm.
Give me this chance to engage with him."
Mm.
And I remember greeting him with the word salam, which is peace.
Yeah.
And I was told later in the debriefing that was the first time he made eye contact with anyone.
Oh.
And then I proceeded. I said, "I noticed that you're carrying a copy of the Holy Quran.
Mm.
Does reciting from the Quran, does that comfort you?"
Mm.
And he didn't say anything. He just nodded his head.
Mm.
I'm getting emotional now recounting this.
Yeah, same.
And then I said, well, I invited him. I said, well, if we recite in unison a passage from the Quran, will that help you?
Mm.
And he nodded.
Mm.
And so that's what we did. We recited the passage. We call it the mother of the Quran, the Fatiha. We recited that in unison. It's only a short passage.
Mm.
And then there were tears streaming down his face.
Mm.
And the term we use in psychiatry is, he de-escalated, right? He de-escalated
Mm.
without the need for rapid tranquilization. And he was exhausted. He was physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted. And after reciting from the Quran, he fell asleep.
Yeah, wow.
To reiterate, without the need for any chemical restraint.
Yeah.
And thank you for asking me to share that experience with you, because again, I think it illustrates an important point.
Mm.
Many of these persons who are unsettled, or who might come across as troubled or aggressive, I think if we just connect with them on a human level,
Yeah.
then we don't need to resort to coercive practice like chemical or physical restraint.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Honestly, when I read that, I thought, what a beautiful interaction of being able
Well,
to actually calm somebody's central nervous system in that way when they're so vulnerable and so exhausted.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard a couple of people. So I deliver mental health first aid England training, and I've had a couple of delegates that will talk about how people feel really afraid to come forward because of fear of being sectioned or heavily medicated and being lost in the system, which is a real barrier, isn't
Oh
it, for
God,
people to come forward?
it is. It is. And in the spirit of being honest, open, and transparent about my mental health experiences, I was terrified that I would be sectioned.
Yeah,
And when I was under the care of a psychiatrist, when I was a medical student, there was a lot of information that I withheld
yeah,
because of that fear of being sectioned or heavily medicated.
yeah,
So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Michelle, because
yeah,
that's something we need to address. That there are barriers. And
yeah,
these barriers are formidable, and we
yeah,
need to break down those barriers. And
yeah.
so I think we need more, as I said, compassion, humility, and that human connection as well, to help break down those barriers.
Yes, and it's that awareness and knowledge of people
Yeah,
hearing that, when people it's because they are fearful that they might be coming across as perhaps, as you said, perhaps if it was in an aggressive way, is that the right way to say it?
yeah,
Because that's what I see people don't quite understand. That's coming from a real fear
yeah,
point of view. And
absolutely.
what we see is that people that are living with mental ill health are more vulnerable to being abused themselves.
I mean, and you make an incredibly important point, because there is that negative stereotype that
Yes,
we have a proclivity for violence. But
yes,
if anything, we are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of violence. And I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. If you speak to us like we are human beings, because we are being dehumanized. But
yes,
we have hopes, and we have fears, and we have strengths, and we have vulnerabilities, and we have dreams like
yeah,
everyone else, And just talk to us like we are human beings. And I promise you that you will notice there will be an improvement in that dynamic between provider and receiver.
yeah. Hey, and it reminds me of your lots of your dreams actually that I've read about in the book, and you think, wow, we'll give you an opportunity to talk more about it.
For sure. For
And
sure.
and I wonder that it might lead us on to a good question here about what really supported your recovery.
So the tools that I utilized, my faith, my
Yeah.
Islamic faith, for sure.
Mm,
And I can give you an example.
mm,
So in Islam, we believe that our Creator is the most merciful,
mm,
and that if you go to your Creator with a mountain of sins, He'll come to you with a mountain of forgiveness.
mm.
And I remember when I was unwell, when I was struggling with my mental health, I remember saying things and doing things that I would never, ever say and do if I was not struggling with my mental health.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, you are consumed by remorse. And
Yeah.
that guilt can be excessive, and it can immobilize you, and you ruminate.
Yeah.
It's like having that broken record player in your mind, and you punish yourself. You can't believe that you said that or you did that. And the damage that was caused that is seemingly beyond repair, and you can't forgive yourself.
Mm.
And you how do you punish yourself? There might be effective treatment available, but I'm not worthy. No, I deserve to suffer.
Wow.
But when I internalize the message of Islam, that this is a way of life that promotes forgiveness,
Yeah.
kindness, and compassion,
Mm.
and I need to show myself the same kindness and compassion that I would for example, towards a loved one. And
Yeah.
that's what helped me to kind of to short circuit that pathological guilt, that excessive guilt, which was immobilizing me. So that's an example of how I was able to utilize my Islamic faith
Yeah.
to contribute to my convalescence. And it continues to contribute to my resilience as well.
Yeah.
That was one tool.
Yeah.
The other tool was exercise, physical activity.
Mm-hmm.
And the importance of physical activity cannot be overstated.
No.
And this falls under the purview of lifestyle interventions, diets,
Mm.
exercise. And we know that there's an intimate relationship between gut health and brain health.
Yeah.
And I always say this, I'm not anti-prescribing psychotropic medications, psychiatric drugs. I'm a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I'm anti-prescribing powerful psychiatric drugs when it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Because there's so much we can do before we get our prescription pads out.
Wow.
So my faith,
Yeah.
lifestyle interventions, physical activity, a healthy body is a healthy mind,
Yeah.
and therapy,
Yeah.
because there's so much unresolved trauma, which is buried
Mm.
in the unconscious. And so by
Mm.
definition, you're not even aware of it.
No.
And to give an example, you might feel cranky. Someone might say something and it wasn't a big deal, but
Mm.
your reaction to that stimulus is disproportionate.
Yeah.
And that's how that unresolved trauma can manifest.
Mm. I'm thinking of the many times that's happened for
Can
me.
you relate to that, right? You're like, why did I react in such a way? Why did I just have that, whatever, that explosive outburst. And it might be because there's unresolved trauma lingering in your unconscious mind that you need to process. And so if you go to a therapist, you can explore the unconscious more. But not only that, it gives you an insight into your personality structure, because a lot of us, we are strangers to ourselves. You don't even know what your vulnerabilities are.
Yeah.
Right? For example, if you're entering a romantic relationship, and why is it that you keep on getting heartbroken, for example? Because you don't know what your vulnerabilities are. That's just an example.
Yeah.
You might, for example, develop a trauma bond. Where did that trauma bond come from? Maybe as a child, you were abandoned by a parent, and you have that fear of abandonment later on in life. And so you enter a relationship, tragically, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, these are major issues. But despite the abuse, you remain in the relationship. Why? Because you're terrified of being abandoned in the same way that you were abandoned as a child. And so you develop that trauma. But the point I'm trying to make is that by receiving therapy, we can develop an insight into our personality structure, our vulnerabilities, our strengths, and that can contribute to mental health recovery, and it can contribute to mental health resilience. And in the same way that we wouldn't hesitate to see a physiotherapist if we sprained our ankle, we shouldn't hesitate to see a psychotherapist if we sustained an injury to the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So therapy, Islamic faith, physical activity, and the performing arts.
Yes. So I want to ask you about this, and just to go back to what you were saying about, I think it is so important that people, when you were mentioning about unhealthy relationships,
Toxic
because it can feel really familiar to somebody because they're not aware of this unconscious blueprint that they have or what's happened for them. So that's why, I agree 100% that therapy can really help you to be able to bring around change for yourself and to have healthier relationships. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, because a lot of people think therapy is just healing these wounds. It is, but there's so much more to therapy as well. It's identifying the vulnerabilities that render you susceptible to entering these toxic relationships. Sure.
Yes, thank you very much. So this leads us to, then, you were talking about the performing arts, which has sounded so exciting and therapeutic as well for you.
Exciting, therapeutic, cathartic, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And powerful. It has this hold over me, certainly when I'm listening to poetry, or when I'm watching a film, or when I'm reading a book, and you are able to identify with the protagonist. And I'm like, wow, that is dignifying, comforting, therapeutic, cathartic.
Yeah.
And I remember, for example, when I was in recovery, and there was this advertisement for this health humanities event at the International Anthony Burgess Foundation in Manchester. And I responded to the invitation. I said, I love to perform improvisation. And there I was on the stage, and it just came out of me, this performance. I remember reenacting scenes from famous films.
Yeah.
The Last of the Mohicans. My father's people say that at the birth of the son and of his brother the moon, and so the mother died, and the earth gave to the body, the sun gave to the body hers, something like that. I mean, I forgot it because it's been a while. I mean, I haven't forgotten it. Probably if I give it, I remember it some more. But the point is, I remember just hearing that, and then reenacting that, and feeling so dignified. And it's through the vehicle of spoken word poetry, I was able to convey the emotions I experienced, the spectrum of human emotion.
Yeah.
When you were at the throes of a mental health condition, the elation, the despair, the pathos.
Mm.
And that was really cathartic. I can't emphasize that enough. And so I ended up pioneering the wounded healer, which has been described as an innovative method of teaching that blends the power of the performing arts and storytelling with mental health education.
Mm.
And yeah, I took 3 years out of my specialist training to deliver the Wounded Healer nationally and internationally. It's intense, and I can't deny it because it did backfire sometimes.
Okay.
And you learn from those experiences, and you
Mm.
try to incorporate the feedback as best as you can.
Mm.
You hope that the criticism is constructive, coming from a good place, right? Because sometimes it felt like the criticism was destructive. I can't deny it, because I did encounter fierce resistance. Like I said, I'm contributing to a cultural revolution.
Yes.
So I did, and I continue to. I mean, I just tweeted about this recently. I continue to encounter fierce resistance, stigma, exclusion, but overall, the response has been overwhelmingly positive.
Well, I was going to say, and I was thinking about the awards that you've won, that you've worked
Oh
incredibly,
yeah.
incredibly hard for.
Hmm, thank you. It's
But
been, oh my God, yeah, it's a lot of hard work and sacrifice and suffering for sure.
yeah, but I was thinking for me, it felt that actually you've been awarded those things because of actually who you are, the work that you put in, and how much you really do want to help those that are marginalized or feeling afraid and share, that's why you're generously sharing your own experiences, aren't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I just don't want people to suffer in silence the
Yeah,
same way that I suffered.
yeah,
That's what keeps me up at night,
yeah,
because effective treatment is available. But I think you mentioned this. You know someone who is who is terrified. They are
yeah,
struggling, but they are terrified to engage with services,
yes,
because of the stigma, because of the shame, because they don't know how they will be treated, and yeah, that needs to change.
no, it really does. I want to go back to what you were saying about with the arts. So I don't know if you can notice, I've got a little sculpture here.
I love the background here. Yeah, I can see the colors as well, the butterflies, and what is the
Well,
sculpture? What does the sculpture mean to you?
yeah, I'll tell you. I was going to say it's funny because you've got your butterfly, and I noticed
Yeah,
I've got all
yeah.
my butterflies. But
Yeah.
I so what I found for me was I know I shared with you earlier. So my oldest son physically left this world in December 22. And what I found was I had to tap into a lot of different therapies and art as well as a way to survive, really.
Hmm,
And so my sculpture for me, I hadn't actually got the narrative to describe my experiences. I believe it's called hermeneutical injustice,
hmm.
when
Wow.
you haven't got the language to describe your experiences. So for me, going to a sculpture class, which I did at the University of Leicester, really gave me a way to externalize what I hadn't made sense of.
Hmm.
And so therapeutic for my mind. I literally felt like you'd got some antiseptic cream and it was being put onto my mind, whereas
Wow.
just to distract myself. And then when I looked at the finished, the end product, for me, it really described what was happening for me. Um,
Very.
yeah,
Wow. And
yeah,
that now has new meaning uh,
yes,
for me. And that's the beauty and the power of art, right? That you were able to express yourself through the medium of art. And again, I'm not knocking psychiatric medication, but that's an example of a non-pharmacological approach to mental health, which you said felt like applying, was it antiseptic on?
antiseptic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that for me, that's like a soothing balm, right? You
It
just you,
was.
you applied that a layer of that soothing balm, and that's just what your mind needed.
Yes, and I hear lots of people I've worked with. I can remember one client saying to me that he'd been painting models of toy cars. And
Mm,
he said to me, he said, but I feel like I've just wasted an hour and a half. And I said to him, but if you could see how healing that is to your mind,
yeah.
these hobbies cannot be underestimated. And lots of people are not putting them as, a priority. It feels like it can be a little bit of a luxury or something sometimes, and that's not the case. And go
I
on.
think I no, I agree with you. I think it's like it's even non-negotiable because it falls under the purview of self-care, right?
Yes.
And that is non-negotiable, and you need to prioritize that for sure. That's
Yeah.
part of it. We need to have a holistic approach to mental health.
Yes. And a medical model of self-care, isn't it? That's going to help us to live longer for our longevity, for our happiness, and for our good health, mental and physical.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. So I want to ask you more about the chime model, which I think you've spoken about, but I'd never heard of the chime model before I read your book, and I was like, whoa, this is good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it's really powerful, right? Yeah, I've heard about it before, and I think I mentioned in my book that I chanced upon it when I was in Barcelona. That was really interesting. It was the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology, and they invited me to give a talk about harnessing the power of storytelling to
Wow,
humanize persons living with a mental health condition and to reject the stigma, which I
it's
thought was very
powerful.
progressive. It was really progressive, right? Because I think almost every almost every other talk was about psychiatric drugs, and so they invited me to give a talk about the performing arts, right, and storytelling, which I thought was really cool. And then I saw the poster, and I was actually writing this chapter about recovery,
Mm.
and I saw the poster at the conference, and oh my God, I don't know. I mean, do you have the chime framework in front of you now, or I think it's like was C was connectivity, right, or connectedness, and so basically, yeah, it's a framework, isn't it?
It's a
Uh,
framework, and we can recommend everybody to read it in the book as well.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. We can plug that in. We can plug that in. But I mean, it talks about things like social connectivity, for example, and physical activity, and identity, and self-determination, and yeah, things like that. Things that the tools that you can utilize to contribute to. I don't think it's just recovery. I think it's resilience as well. So yeah,
Yes.
highly recommend that people read about that in my book.
Yeah. That word resilience, so it comes from the Latin word resilio, doesn't it? And it means how we bounce back,
Yeah.
because in this life we will sadly all face adversity,
Yes.
and it's our mental health will govern how we are able to bounce back or to weather that.
Yeah.
Obviously that's some of what it governs for us. And I love how you keep saying about hope, because it is that hope, isn't it? That people need, that,
Oh my God.
is likely and it is possible that they can recover, and not necessarily, we're not talking about become cured or become symptom free, but
Yeah.
how they manage that holistically, like you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really want to echo what you said. Like many of us, if not most, with the right support, we can recover. It might not be a full recovery. It might not be a full recovery.
Yeah.
And that's such an important message because I remember when I was at the throes of a mental health condition, when the symptoms were severe and debilitating, I lost all hope that I
Wow.
would ever recover. And if you said to me then that I would become a World Health Organization award-winning psychiatrist, I would never have believed you, for example.
No.
So it's really important that we plant the seeds of hope into the hearts, minds, bodies, and souls of persons receiving care from us.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are so many things that have been said about hope. One of my favorite quotes is, "Don't ever take hope away from someone, because sometimes hope is all they have left."
Oh.
So it's such an important thing. But
Mm.
also, I don't want to sit down here and say to you that everyone will recover, because that's not true.
No.
Because there are persons living with a severe mental illness who tragically, through no fault of their own, no matter how hard they try, they continue to struggle and to suffer. And that's heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
again, in my book, I say I say in my book, a government should be based on how they treat the most vulnerable people in society, such as
Yeah,
persons living with a severe mental illness. And if you look at how persons living with a severe mental illness are being treated, the government has failed spectacularly.
haven't
So
they?
more resources need to be allocated,
Yes.
and more specialist support must be made available. But I really want to emphasize, yes, with the right support, many, if not most persons living with a mental health condition can recover. And it's really important for us to disseminate that message of hope and recovery.
Yes. Yeah, powerful stuff. Thank you very much. I've got a couple more questions I want to
Yeah,
ask you as well.
sure.
Yes. I thought this was a real light bulb moment for myself. So I'll just read this excerpt from your book. So you said, before starting university, you had not thought about how people from low-income backgrounds are underrepresented in medical schools to the extent that studying medicine is preserved for the middle and upper classes. However, medical schools must be a reflection of the diverse communities who doctors serve. And I can remember reading that and feeling like, whoa. Yeah. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you felt that way and that you had that light bulb moment.
Mm,
Unfortunately, persons from low income backgrounds are underrepresented in medical school.
yeah.
And the medical profession must be a reflection of the communities that we serve. I mean, we think we call them the social determinants of health, especially mental health,
Yeah.
poverty, unemployment, accommodation insecurity. All of these are the social determinants influencing our health, especially our mental health.
Yeah.
And, I've been honest, open, and transparent about my difficulties because I left my family when I was 17. I was an independent student. I had to work to survive.
Yeah.
And I do feel that my experiences empower me to have to have authentic connections with persons receiving care from me, especially persons from low income backgrounds. I feel like it does make me more empathetic.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, also because we must
Mm,
not stop persons who have the ability, who have the talent, who have the potential, but are unable, for example, to realize that potential because of the financial
mm,
restraints that
mm.
are imposed on them through no fault of their own. And so we need to, for example, support broadening participation
Yeah.
initiatives. And but also, medical schools need to do a better job. They need to, for example, more financial support must be made available. But also, I think it feels like persons from low income backgrounds are stigmatized. Like if you go to an interview at medical
Mm,
school, you meet the panel, and it's like, how many people on that panel are from a low income background? I mean, I just said it. They,
yeah.
they are underrepresented, and it might be that there is that kind of bias or stigma, conscious and or unconscious. And
Mm,
that needs to change for
mm,
sure.
mm. Well, yeah, it was something that I thought, my goodness, the light bulb for me was what a great point to make.
Thank you.
So yes.
Because I was in medical school and I just saw privilege everywhere. Like, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
we don't have any say. We don't have any say on the cards that we were dealt with in life, right?
Yeah.
We don't have any say over that. But what we do have a say over is how we play those cards. And
Yeah.
it's not a level playing field.
No.
Disadvantage is not distributed equally. And I think it's identifying those persons who have more disadvantage.
Mm.
That could be in the form of a mental health condition. That could be in the form of coming from a low income background and supporting those persons.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. And I've got just one more question, if
Yeah,
that's
sure.
all right for you. Yeah.
So
Because
almost
I
been an
thought
hour.
another
Time is just flying.
I know. It's another really good point that you spoke about. When I've worked with counselling clients, what I've seen is that for a lot of people that perhaps, so when I'm talking about medication, I've worked with thousands of students, and what I saw was that medication could be really helpful for some people. For some people, it wasn't, or they needed, they might have got stuck on the same medication for a while. They didn't realise they could go back and then negotiate to talk about, look, these are the side effects, or, is this the right one for me? And you talk about the importance of the de-prescribing strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I thought, whoa, so could you tell us about that, please?
Absolutely, for sure. So unfortunately, it seems like there can be polarization and like two camps when it comes to psychiatric drugs. You have people in one camp who promote it and who say it's life-saving, and you have people on the other camp who say it's life-destroying, and they try to discourage and deter others from taking psychiatric drugs because they had negative experiences, to say the least, themselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can see these online battles raging and people being abusive towards each other. And these online attacks can be devastating for our mental health.
Goodness.
And I would even say they can contribute to suicidal behaviors, and I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
And especially when the online abuse comes from psychiatrists, because I have been the victim of online abuse from fellow psychiatrists.
Yeah.
Who really should know better. Mm. The very profession that has been charged to protect our mental health.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there are many, many psychiatrists who have been incredibly supportive towards me, but there are a few who have been so vitriolic that if I was more vulnerable, it would have pushed me over the edge. So that's deeply concerning. And sometimes this kind of revolves around psychiatric drugs. So to reiterate, I'm not anti-prescribing psychotropic medication, psychiatric drugs. I'm anti-prescribing powerful psychiatric drugs when it's not necessary and for longer than is necessary. So I think you need to be on the lowest possible dosage for the shortest duration of time. And if you have a prescribing plan, you must also have a de-prescribing plan. And you rightly said, before we prescribe medication for patients, we have to be clear about the side effects, for example, and how they can range in severity from mild to severe, depending on the individual and other factors such as age, gender, race, and how we metabolize the medications. There are persons who report that the medications are helpful, and there are persons who report the medications are unhelpful. It really does depend on the individual.
Yeah.
And so we have to be holistic. We have to have this kind of individualized approach. Mm. And the art and science of de-prescribing it's a relatively new branch of psychiatry, isn't it? And I'm pleased to say credit to Mark Horowitz, who now I think has an international reputation. He's based, I think, in UCL, and he just co-edited the first textbook on the de-prescribing guidelines. So in psychiatry, we have the Maudsley prescribing guidelines, the MPG. So the Maudsley Hospital is like a world-renowned psychiatric hospital. And many psychiatrists refer to the MPG, the Maudsley prescribing guidelines, as the Bible.
Right.
There are like 12 editions. Yeah, there are like 12 editions of the Maudsley prescribing guidelines. And only in 2024 or late 2023 did the first edition of the de-prescribing guidelines come out. So, yeah, just to kind of summarize, it really does depend on the individual. There are persons who report that. I was prescribed psychiatric drugs. Yeah. They were unhelpful for me.
Yeah.
They were unhelpful for me. But for me to say that because they are unhelpful for me, therefore they are unhelpful for everyone, no, that's not true. And it might have been that specific drug at that specific dosage at that specific period in my life. Yeah. There's some kind of variables that you need to take into consideration. But also, if just because it might be helpful for me, it doesn't necessarily mean it's helpful for someone else. So we really need to have that kind of individualized approach. I think we need to be respectful towards each other because these online attacks, it's just not helping. It can be very harmful.
Yeah.
And I think, we need to have these conversations. And also, I think there's a huge amount of stigma attached to taking psychiatric medications. So although I am more interested in non-pharmacological approaches, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm against psychiatric drugs. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, but we need to work collaboratively with persons receiving care from us. And as I said, there's a lot that can be done before we get our prescription pads out.
Yeah. Hey, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, I could keep on asking and listening. So
you make it so easy for me, so it just flows out.
Oh, brilliant. So I think really to summarize, well, when I was talking about the prescribing strategy as well, I think what I was thinking of too was I've seen lots of people where they might be struggling to take their medication and then they just come off it, they just stop, and it needs to be where it's, it's done, doesn't it, where it comes down properly and it's managed.
Absolutely.
Those amazing points that you were saying there. It's really interesting. So I wanted to end on, so your book Breakthrough.
Yes.
Who would you say? I mean, you do say it in the opening about who you've really written it for, and I thought that was a lovely way to end our conversation. So when you were writing that, who were you really aiming it for?
Well, I can read it out to you. Shall I give you a little?
That's brilliant. I love that you had a mission statement for it and everything. I was like, whoa.
Well, I'm so happy that my words resonated with you, Michelle. And it's persons like you, persons who provide care to others, persons who have maybe they've experienced mental health difficulties. But I mean, I think it's for everyone, because mental health concerns us all. Politicians and influencers and family members. It concerns us all. But
shall I read you the bit that I loved, or are you going to read it?
Oh, which one? If you let me know which part you love, then I can read it for you.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
So it's on page here. It's just above your mission statement.
Okay. Yeah.
And you put the most important group.
There it is. Yeah. Okay, just important. Ooh. Scrolling down, this book contains short story. The book is aimed, This book is aimed at people living with mental health problems, their family members, friends, and caregivers. It is also targeted at health and social care workers and the general public. In other words, this book is for everyone, because mental health is everyone's business and it concerns us all. But the most important group are people who themselves are living with mental health difficulties. It is my hope that you will be able to draw upon this book for guidance, solace, and advice, and that you can learn lessons from the many, in inverted commas, mistakes that I have made. Perhaps you will be able to identify with me and relate to my experiences, both the symptoms and the stigma associated with mental health conditions. This identification can be validating and make you feel less alone and less ashamed. I hope that by sharing my story, it will give you hope that people living with mental health conditions can, with the right support and resources, recover, function again, and realize their potential, and even their dreams.
Wow. Hey, what a lovely way to end our conversation. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. One of many collaborations, hopefully.
Yes.
And hopefully to meet in person. That would be lovely.
That would be lovely. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.